Good morning, everyone. I'm Congressman Joe Crowley, Chair of the Democratic Caucus. First and foremost, I want to express on behalf of the entire Democratic Caucus our concern for our compatriots, our friends, our family members, members of our Democratic Caucus and the Republican Caucus, Americans across the board who are suffering in Florida and Georgia and elsewhere, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, as a result of this horrific storm, Irma, the largest storm to ever hit the continental United States. We know that there are still many people without power, lives that have been lost, lives that have been turned upside down, and our thoughts and prayers are with all those individuals. But more than that, the resolve, I think, of this Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to come together like we did last week to respond initially to what happened in Texas with Harvey, to do likewise for our co-citizens in Florida as well. And I'm sure some of the other colleagues will have some other comments on that. It's going to be a long recovery, and a great deal of resources will be expended, but they ought to be expended to help bring back the economy of Florida and the Caribbean, and more importantly, to restore people to their normal lives. But I've long said Americans want to know what we Democrats, what we stand for, and how we're going to create good-paying jobs that help the hardest working men and women secure their place in the middle class. And we all know our agenda can't just be against Donald Trump, as alluring as that may be. We need a vision backed by policy, so all Americans know what Democrats stand for and what we're fighting for, and how it will help them in their bottom line. And that's why I'm so proud this morning to announce the creation of the Jobs for America Task Force, a united effort from House Democrats to create a specific set of legislation and policies on jobs and the economy. Guided by the Better Deal agenda, our members will create a jobs package that Democrats can advocate for in this Congress and beyond. Led by some of the hardest working members in our caucus, this will put, as I say, meat on the bones for Democrats. It will show how our vision is America's vision, that we stand behind working families in America. And with that, I want to turn to the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Linda Sanchez.
Thank you, Joe. I want to echo, thank you. I want to echo Joe's sentiments with respect to those who've been affected by the hurricanes, and Democrats stand united in trying to provide the relief and the resources needed to help people put their lives back together. Today, I'm proud to stand with Chairman Crowley and our task force co-chairs to launch the Jobs for America task forces. House Democrats are focused on helping America's working families through bold efforts to create jobs, grow paychecks, and to strengthen our economy. Our priority is to support hardworking men and women who make up the backbone of our country. And the Jobs for America task forces will keep working to move forward an agenda that will give more families more financial security. These task forces will help develop a jobs-focused legislative package as part of our Better Deal agenda. They'll help us live up to our promise to deliver better wages, better jobs, and a better future for the American people. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce one of the chairs of the DPCC, Mr. David Cicilline.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Vice Chair Sanchez. I want to begin by thanking our Chairman Crowley and Vice Chair Sanchez, and the leaders of the 5 new task forces. In particular, I want to thank Chairman Crowley and Vice Chair Sanchez for recognizing the urgency of focusing on improving the economic lives of working Americans. There is nothing more important to us as Democrats than creating good paying jobs and raising incomes for folks who are already working. It has always been the case in this country that we believe the next generation of Americans will have a better life than the current one. But today, for the first time in our history, working men and women don't believe that their children will have a better life than themselves. They're worried. They're worried about making ends meet. They're worried about the opportunities their kids will have. They're worried about saving for a secure retirement. And as corporate special interests spend millions to influence political campaigns, working people are convinced that Washington doesn't work for them. And that's why Democrats have outlined a new, bold economic agenda, a better deal, better jobs, better wages for a better future. This is our plan to create good-paying jobs, raise incomes, lower costs in people's lives, and provide working people with tools that they need to get ahead in the 21st century. We've already announced some of the ways that Democrats will do this when we take the House back, creating 10 million new full-time, good-paying jobs, doubling support for apprenticeship programs, invest in rebuilding our bridges, roads, and public transit, break up corporate monopolies that destroy jobs and raise costs on consumers, and lower the cost of prescription drugs, and demanding transparency from pharmaceutical companies. And I'm very grateful that the 5 task forces that the chairman is announcing today are going to help develop specific proposals to make this economic agenda a reality. We have a lot of talent in our caucus. I think the chairman is right. These are some of the best and smartest people in the Democratic caucus. I know that they're going to do great work, and with their help, we will move forward in helping to create an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few, an economy where hard work is valued and honored with a good wage, and where working people are treated with dignity and respect, the dignity and respect they deserve, and all Americans will finally get a better deal. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, an important member of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, Ms. Del Bene.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm honored to join my colleagues, Debbie Dingell of Michigan, Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois, and Darren Soto of Florida in leading the New Economy Task Force. We've seen many changes in the way the world works, from e-commerce to advanced manufacturing, and these changes have created great opportunities and painful disruptions. And our policies have not kept pace with these changes. Our collective goal is to make sure workers have the tools they need to take advantage of the opportunities and to overcome the disruptions. We need a national commitment to ensure not a single American is left behind as we forge new paths ahead. Innovations are happening across the country. In my district, we have industries ranging from aerospace, manufacturing, and technology to agriculture, clean energy, and healthcare, all of which are driving the economy forward. But there are still geographic disparities and skill gaps that must be addressed to give every worker an opportunity to achieve the American dream. To ensure workers gain the skills they need to succeed in these new and changing jobs, we need strong programs and STEM education, or as I like to say, STEAM education, because the arts and creative thinking are just as important as we build innovative and lifelong learners. By creating opportunities for long-term job growth in America, we can make every community, family, and business in the nation stronger and more resilient. Thank you, and now I'd like to introduce my colleague from California, Congresswoman Julia Brownley.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, and I too want to thank the chairman and vice chairwoman for putting these important task force together. I'm proud to co-chair the Reinvesting in Our Returning Heroes Task Force with my colleagues Brad Schneider, Donald McEachin, and Ruben Gallego. I represent Ventura County, the proud home of Naval Base Ventura County and almost 50,000 veterans. I see firsthand every day the sacrifices our men and women in uniform make to keep us safe. I also know that their family members sacrifice equally as much for our country. When our soldiers return home, they face enormous challenges. They struggle to find adequate health care. They struggle to integrate back into their communities. They struggle to find housing, a good school for their children, and often to simply adjust to a very different rhythm in their day-to-day lives. And unfortunately, many of them struggle to find a job, any job, much less a good paying job in a field they love that will lead to a successful and long career. Before our young men and women join the military, we tell them that they will learn the skills they'll need to be successful in the 21st century economy. And employers in my district tell me they want to hire more veterans, and yet they still struggle. The struggles vary from physical injuries suffered in combat to mental health issues, or in many cases, simply because the training they received in the military doesn't line up with local, state, and federal requirements. A good example is my constituent Tina, who served with distinction in the Navy. She was trained as a medical specialist. She excelled at it, and when she finished her service, she wanted to use those skills to help others by becoming a vocational nurse. That is nothing less than a win-win for Tina and for our nation. But when she completed her service, she learned that she would have to spend a considerable amount of time training all over again before she could be licensed as a nurse. Having already served and having already been trained, she just couldn't invest even more time to go through a process that would teach her what she already knew, simply because her training wasn't recognized. That's what this task force is about, finding issues like these and crafting legislation to address them. Our nation makes a promise to our men and women in uniform that the skills they learn while serving will position them for good-paying jobs when they return to civilian life. This task force is going to work on legislation to make good on that promise, a better deal, better jobs, better pay, better future for all Americans. And it's my great distinct honor to introduce friend and colleague Mark Pocan.
Thank you, Julia, and thanks to Joe and Linda for putting this together and all my other colleagues for being here. When you hear us talk about better jobs, better wages, and a better future, let me try to put it another way, coming from the America's heartland, from Wisconsin. It's really what people talk about at their kitchen tables. Can they afford their mortgage or rent? Can they have health care for their family? Can they take a family vacation? Can they send their kids to college if they want to go? That's what people actually talk about. Just contrast that with what we're doing right now in Congress. We've spent the first 8 months trying to take away health care from 20 million people. We want to now cut taxes for the wealthiest in this country, and some people are willing to shut down government over a wall. Well, I can tell you in Paul Ryan's district, which is a neighboring district to mine, if the wall means you're keeping employers in, they might support that. But 25,000 people used to make cars in the 1st Congressional District in Paul Ryan's district. No one does today. So the subcommittee that I'm on, along with Ami Berra, Mark Veazey, and Lisa Blunt-Rochester, is to talk specifically about access to jobs, what we can do to help do that. That covers everything from higher education, apprenticeships, access to capital, entrepreneurship. Those are the goals that we have with this committee, and we are up to the task and looking forward to make sure that our caucus continues to focus on what's most important to people across the country, and that's talking about jobs and wages, something the Republicans simply aren't doing. And it is my honor to introduce, I believe the word is spectacular I'm supposed to use, Representative from Pennsylvania, Brendan Boyle.
I swear I did not tell him to say that, although that might not be totally accurate. I want to thank Joe and Linda for their leadership that they've exercised in creating these task force. I am the chairman of the Jobs with Dignity Task Force. And yes, this is about jobs, but it's also about something deeper than that. It really strikes at the heart of the American dream. The idea that no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll be able to provide for yourself and your family, and your kids will be even better off and have more opportunities than you had. There are sadly millions of Americans today who believe that that no longer exists. The lack of job opportunity and the lack of jobs that pay well and jobs with dignity is directly related to why there's such a lack of faith today in the American dream. So our task force is going to look specifically at 3 ways that we can address this. Number 1, to raise wages. Yes, we need to increase the minimum wage. Our caucus is entirely united behind that. It is at its lowest level in more than a half century. But our economic message cannot just be about raising the minimum wage. We will be looking at strategies that affect the workforce, the majority of workers who currently make more than the minimum wage, but not enough to provide for their families or even begin to think about saving for college. Number 2, incentivize those workers who have left the workforce. While we got a good census data yesterday, it is clear there are more people outside the workforce today than at any point in American history. We want to come up with some strategies to address that and have them return to the labor force. And third and finally, restore retirement security. A pillar of the 20th century in building a middle class was Social Security and jobs that had defined pensions. The idea that you could retire with dignity. Today, we have seen those pensions largely disappear from the private sector and are increasingly under threat in the public sector. We want to talk about ways and strategies that we can restore retirement security and really give all workers that peace of mind that they will not retire in poverty. Now with that, it is, as he was telling me, my honor and privilege to introduce one of the veterans we have serving, a fellow classmate and someone who is an example living the American dream, Ruben Gallego.
Good morning. I'm here to talk about returning heroes, so I guess I will do that. But I think it's something that's been really struck upon is the idea of employment for veterans. And we are doing much better. When I first got back from the war and I went to try to get a managerial job at a bank that shall remain nameless, the first thing they told me is you don't have any leadership experience. This after literally doing 7 months of patrols through Iraq, with 5 men under the age of 19, and I was told that I couldn't even man the clerical desk at a bank. To today, where we have some great partnerships that's actually occurring with some of this same bank, for example, where we actually have the unemployment numbers of veterans dropping, while at the same time, many veterans starting business. But we have to continue a lot of that work that was built upon during Barack Obama's presidency. Last year, we saw some attempts, for example, to roll back the veterans hiring policy, snuck in through the NDAA by Republicans in the Senate. It was Democrats that actually led the resistance against that and were able to turn that around. We're seeing some of those attempts again. We have to look and stop any attempts to basically use the GI Bill as a pay-for other defense priorities, as well as tax cuts. The GI Bill is extremely important. It actually, in my opinion, saved millions of veterans from potentially finding themselves in some very dire situations. It gives you housing. It gives you basic standard of living. But many a times, whenever the Department of Defense needs to find money, they're always trying to look at the GI Bill in trying to steal some of the money from there when it comes to living, the housing allowance that you see there, as well as in general trying to make veterans pay into the GI Bill, which is something that was not agreed to by many of us when we joined. So the first step for hiring heroes is to stop all the attempts by the Republicans to use veterans essentially and a lot of our benefits as a way to pay for the tax cuts for the wealthy. So that's step one. The step two is obviously to take positive steps to increase both veteran participation in the workforce as well as in starting their own businesses. So, for example, some of the ideas that we're kicking around working on is allowing veterans to tap the GI Bill to start small businesses. There's a lot of veterans that do not want to go back to school. They want to start their own business, but startup capital is very difficult. So many of us have been working ideas, both trying to conjoin the GI Bill with the Small Business Administration so that way they can use that type of money, the money to basically start their business that they would have instead of going to college. Some of them don't want to go to four-year college, and some of them don't want to just get an apprenticeship. Some of them just want to go to coding school, for example, learn how to computer code. So we're helping a lot of these veterans be able to use access to GI Bill to go to some of these coding schools, which helps them get employment in a faster and quicker manner. So as well as continued partnership and encouragement for our for-profit sectors, our corporations, in terms of their veterans employment. So we are continuing our tradition as Democrats as being the party of veterans, the party that takes care of veterans and makes sure that they have the same amount of dignity and respect while they serve that they're going to have when they're out. And we're going to continue doing that. With that, oh, what's that? Oh, okay. And we're going to go to questions.
Yeah, before we go to questions, I want to thank both Dr. Raul Ruiz, who's also a co-chair of one of our task forces, as well as Lisa Blunt Rochester, who's joined us as well. I want to thank them for their enthusiasm. And they're here to answer questions as well as the other members of our task force on the creation of the task force. Are there any questions out there on the task force? First, pull it down. Any? Yes.
In terms of the timetable moving forward, when can we expect to see the Caucus
That's a great question. Thank you. We want our, these hardworking, thoughtful members to put their nose to the grindstone and to work expeditiously. But our expectation is between now and the end of the year to have product ready to be brought before the caucus, to have further discussion. We're looking for the entire caucus's participation. These 20 or so members are leading the charge in terms of the effort of the task force itself, but this is a caucus-driven, this will be a caucus-driven product. And I think there's going to be a stark comparison between the first 100 days of the Trump and Republican-controlled Congress and the first 200 days of the Trump Republican-controlled Congress, and the third 100 days of the Trump Republican-controlled Congress in terms of what was promised and what was accomplished, and what Democrats will do within the first 100 days, 200 days, et cetera. I think that's going to be a very stark comparison, and one that we look forward to drawing attention to. Anyone else have any comment?
I would just add, it's really an attempt to be thoughtful about the ways in which we can create better jobs in this country with good wages and create a better future. And it's incumbent upon our members to come up with these pieces of legislation that we will introduce. We're hopeful that our colleagues across the aisle will look at our ideas. In many instances, they prefer to go it alone, and they're not interested in talking to us about our agenda. But we want to highlight exactly, specifically, what we intend to do for the American public if they put our trust in us and give us back the majority in 2018.
I also just want to point out the enthusiastic support from the overall leadership of the Democratic Caucus as well, from Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, and just from the ranking members of the standing committees as well. Their enthusiasm in seeing this avenue open up for the caucus's participation. Yes, ma'am.
House Republicans and some House Democrats joining the White House today. Do you know if these Democrats will be bringing up some of these proposals, and also what do you hope the message from the Democrats are to the president?
I think that many, I don't know if any of the folks here are going today.
I didn't get the invite this time.
You didn't get the invite?
No.
I do think that many of those Democrats are earnest in wanting to try to find solutions to the problems, as we all are, trying to find solutions. I think anytime there's an opportunity for dialogue, members should take that opportunity. It's not a social call. This is not going to have a cup of tea with the president. This is to go to, hash out and to talk about issues of concern to, I think, Americans. And so, you'll have to talk to those individual members who are going themselves. I was not invited this week. So, yes.
Following up on that, I know some of the Democrats want to push a tax reform infrastructure package to Trump. Way back when he was really interested in doing infrastructure, are you guys more hopeful that you could do that kind of deal with him after the debt limit deal last week, when Republican leaders up here seem very intent on doing a reconciliation party line?
Before I go to that, can I just, is there any other questions on the task force itself? No one else have any? No? I think hope springs eternal. We're all hopeful that at some point we can actually get to the point where Republicans can actually legislate. We haven't seen that materialize as of yet. We know, the folks here on the stage know that we need to make investment in infrastructure. That's a big part of what this task force is about itself, coming up with those types of ideas, and whether it's the use of repatriated funds or whatever it's going to take to have a bold plan of investment, reinvestment in the United States. 35% of our tunnels and our bridges and our roads are in poor shape. And that comes from engineers around the United States who are saying that, professionals are saying to us that that needs to be a massive investment in our infrastructure. But we're going beyond that. We're talking about the broadband expansion. We're talking about building schools. We're talking about infrastructure in a whole new way in many respects. Water tunnels, clean water, environmental projects that can be done, long-term jobs, high-paying jobs, jobs that can put Americans back to work very, very quickly. Speaking from the East Coast, West Coast, and the heart of the country as well. That's what this task force is about addressing as well. Does anyone else want to chime in? Yes.
Congressman Crowley, and for Ms. Sanchez too, after I get your thoughts on this. Congressman Smith has created a media fairness caucus to counter what he considers unfair spin.
Which Smith is this?
Lamar Smith.
Lamar, because there's many Smiths. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
To counter what laid some of that on the Democrats. Can you project being able to work with him to somehow validate how legislation is portrayed both in the media and by your party?
Well, I think many of us would like to be able to say we could put a bill on the floor if we so desire to do so. We'd also like to say we can prevent a bill from coming to the floor if we desire to do so. None of us have that ability that I'm aware of. If you do, you haven't told me about that. And so for Lamar Smith to say that, it really is baffling when his party controls the agenda as to what bills come to the floor and what bills do not come to the floor. And that's the same in the Senate. And so I think what you saw happen last week was some modicum of bipartisanship in terms of the debt ceiling and the CR. And maybe that's an indication that there'll be more opportunities to work in a bipartisan way to advance the issues that are important to the American people. But beyond that deal with the president, I really don't know what to expect at this point on DACA, on ensuring that the administration pays its bills and gets behind the Affordable Care Act. I mean, what we've seen last week is that they're going to spend less than 10% of what the Obama administration spent in terms of promotion of health care in this country. I think that's the wrong direction. We shouldn't be moving that way. So should I let the gentlelady from California respond? So.
Yeah, thank you. I find it highly ironic that he's concerned about the bias in the media towards legislative proposals. Most responsible reporters report on bills, what's in the bills. They typically provide quotes from proponents and those who are detractors of bills and allow the public to make up their mind. And I would suggest that perhaps Lamar Smith is unhappy because the majority of American people, once they read what's in Republican bills, understand that they're not bills that are good for this country, and so therefore he thinks the press is biased in influencing people's decisions. I think people are smart enough to draw their own conclusions as to whether or not what they propose is good for them versus what Democrat ideas are and what the Democrats propose. And I would suggest that Mr. Lamar Smith find a way to get the Republicans to govern responsibly and to create legislation that actually is going to help middle-class Americans and working-class Americans and the working poor pull themselves out of poverty.
Any other questions, Mike?
Yeah, I have a question on the task force. Democrats.
We close questions on the task force. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll ask others.
Teasing, I'm kidding.
Democrats have been pushing these ideas for a long time. You mentioned minimum wage, you mentioned infrastructure. Steny Hoyer's been doing Make America stuff for 7 or 8 years, and there's probably 60 or 70 bills under that umbrella by now. I think Swalwell was doing new economy stuff a few years ago. So just what in this is new? Are you going to go back and look at all the bills that you've introduced in the past and see which ones fit these different topics, these different buckets, or are you looking for new legislation?
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that.
What is new here?
Well, I would like some of my colleagues to maybe chime in as well. What I've said when I became the chairman of the caucus is that what we would develop in terms of that message, in terms of moving forward and addressing the issues as to why we think we haven't been successful in recent elections when it came to the presidential election, when it came to the winning back the House of Representatives, was the issue of jobs. The American people want to hear an economic message. They want to hear an economic message about jobs. And that building this up from the bottom up, from the caucus itself, that the caucus will own this message. The caucus, when we talk about better jobs, we talk about better pay and a better future and a better deal. It's putting the meat on the bones. That's what this task force is about, and getting that entire ownership of our caucus on this and expanding opportunities for these great minds to contribute towards that message. And I don't know if, Doctor, you've been so great on this. Let me call upon you.
I think what's new is the innovation that we have the opportunity to address. If we want to look at transportation of the future, why don't we dream of using magnetic forces or some kind of electronic rails or other kind of forms that will not only be a win-win in increasing transportation modalities, which will decrease traffic congestion and wear and tear on our bridges, but also keep our environment clean. The other new is identifying win-win situation, for example, with our healthcare. let's think of and dream of a new vision of healthcare in the future that can increase quality, decrease cost, and increase patient satisfaction. And we've seen that a lot of home-based, community-type healthcare is doing just that. It's reducing healthcare costs, increasing patient satisfaction, and good health outcomes. Right now, our model is very tertiary, big hospital, expensive care, where if we start to look at the workforce of the future and creating those kind of jobs, we can take people from those communities, train them as paraprofessionals who can go and do home visits for our veterans in the VA system, our tribes in the IHS system, and others to really promote that workforce. So that's what's new in these type of legislation. Will there be some legislation? Well, yeah, because we know that increasing a wage is something we've been talking about for a long time, and it's something that's very necessity. The problem is that the middle class, although a job is better than no job, is only, their purchasing power is decreasing because of inflation and the cost of living, and their wages have been stagnant. And when the middle class are having more expensive and not increasing their ability to purchase goods, then the whole economy doesn't progress. So we need to give an increase and empower the middle class's purchasing power in order to improve the economy, and look at different ways that we can incentivize small businesses to grow, to create jobs, and really be the backbone of our economy. So yes, there will be some components. There's no doubt about it, because they're just the fundamentals of what we believe, but from what we hear from the American people, and what is needed. But the whole point here is that there is an outrage, and we feel that outrage as well, and that anxiety of the middle class. When you have 54% of the American people who can tell you that they cannot find $500 from an unexpected bill from themselves to pay for that unexpected bill, that is real anxiety. When you have 80% who can't find $1,000 from an unexpected bill to pay for their child going to the emergency department, or some plumbing or pipe breaks in their house, that is real anxiety. And so this effort is to really understand, go further, to dream of innovative solutions for the future. We can look at cybersecurity, addresses the issue of our lack of cybersecurity in our public institutions, our private institutions throughout our nation to protect our public goods. So we can look at developing that future of cybersecurity and what that looks like for America to keep ourselves safe as well. So those are things that we need to dream of and envision the America 20 years from now, and start building that infrastructure and the blueprints that are needed to get us there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can I just follow up on that very quickly? You said this is a caucus-wide thing, kind of a caucus up. Is that an acknowledgement that in the past some of these efforts have been too top-down?
I think it's an acknowledgement that if we're going to be successful in terms of the messaging and in terms of getting and creating solutions to the problems that the doctor just expressed, the real issues that Americans are facing every day, it's going to take our entire caucus being involved in this process and tightening up that message in terms of the legislation that we will produce, and calling upon the leadership of the House right now to act, calling upon the Senate to act, taking some of those ideas from both Democrats and Republicans and bringing those in terms of the message that Democrats, our caucus, that we will create to answer the call of the American people who have been loud and clear with us. We may have not been listening, but they've been loud and clear that this caucus, this Democratic caucus, is listening to the American people who are suffering, as the doctor just made a point of mentioning to some of those issues. There are many, many issues when it comes to the economy, the ever-changing nature of the economy, the growth of the economy, in some places the stagnation of the economy. That's what Democrats have to speak to with their heart and with their soul, and that's what this task force will do. And Lisa Blunt-Rochester.
Thank you. I just want to echo the question about what's new. I think I'm the only freshman up here right now. Some of us are new. And this is exciting to me because, as Joe said, we're looking across the whole caucus. So it's an inclusive process. And I think it represents our country. I come from Delaware, where we have farmers, where we have a fintech sector, where we have tourism. We have people who are coming out of prisons. We have people with disabilities. This process, this caucus, is focused on all Americans. And I think that's the other clear message, is that as Democrats, we don't have to sacrifice clean air, clean water for a strong economy. We see that there is a connection between what the future jobs are and preparing people for them, but also removing the barriers that stop people from getting to work or stop people from having their own business. So for me, this is exciting, it's aspirational, it's the future, but it's also right now, and I'm proud to be a part of this caucus.